So, when I was growing up, I lived in the same house as my mom, but we didn't live in the same neighborhood. See, my mom never had a reason to fear or distrust the police, but for me, that was a big part of my childhood. And I learned at a young age that I would experience some things differently than my white mom because I have a black dad. For example, one of the few memories I have of my dad as a kid is seeing him yelled at and questioned by police on the street. And when they didn't like the answers he was giving them to their questions, they proceeded to aggressively question me. And I was just 8 years old. And as I grew older, that fear and distrust of police grew with me. By the time I was in high school, I was getting stopped by cops and security guards at the mall, at the bus station, on the street, and often they'd have comments about how I dressed in baggy jeans and hoodies like any other kid at the time. In high school, I was so afraid of cops that anyone in a uniform made me feel uncomfortable. And unfortunately, that experience isn't unique to me, but it's the status quo in a lot of neighborhoods across North America. Right here in Toronto, for example, black people make up 8.1% of our population. But over 1/4 of the people who were stopped by police last year to have their personal information entered into the police database were black. And that type of disproportionate interaction, when it's seen as unfair and illegitimate, breeds a distrust of law enforcement. It makes people distrust cops, who are the most visible faces of our legal system. And when people distrust law enforcement because they believe that the law is not being enforced equally across all communities, they grow to distrust their government and believe that their government works for some people, but not for all people. There is no better reminder of the relationship between policing and democracy than what happened in Ferguson, Missouri earlier this year, and it's continuing to happen today. The streets of Ferguson erupted in protest after the killing of Michael Brown at the hands of a Ferguson police officer. And just like when you're boiling water, that boiling point of frustration building up in Ferguson didn't happen overnight, but rather it's the product of gradual frustration, resentment, and struggle that people have felt with their police department there. Consider this. Ferguson's population is 67% black, but only 3 of the city's 63 police officers are black. Black people in Ferguson make up 86% of the people who were stopped by police last year and 92% of the people who were searched by police last year. Those statistics tell a story of a community that is frustrated with their police department, but it's made all the more worse by an oblivious government. While the people of Ferguson were in the street protesting, the mayor of that city was on television claiming, and I quote, that all residents of the city believe there is no racial divide in the city of Ferguson. Seriously, he said that. Now, if we're going to address this problem and avoid those boiling points, that tension like we're seeing in Ferguson right now, we can't just focus on the extreme incidents, like the death of Michael Brown, that make international news headlines and you see on television. But we also have to address the series of smaller injustices that go under the radar but breed that distrust in the first place. And for the last few years, I've been working on a solution to those smaller injustices. I studied policing and other social justice issues at Yale University and moved back to Canada last year to found an organization called the Policing Literacy Initiative. And what we do is develop ideas that will improve the way police interact with low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. One of the highlights of this work for me over the past year is when I myself filed a complaint against 2 Toronto police officers last year. About a year ago to this day, I was standing outside my apartment building in the Little Jamaica neighborhood of Toronto. And I was on the phone with a senior person at one of the biggest international business firms in the world. He was giving me some career advice. And as we were talking things through, a police car pulled up. And in it were 2 white police officers. And they told me they received a report about a suspicious black male in the area. Now, when you're fishing for a black male in the Little Jamaica neighborhood of Toronto, you're going to find them. So they found me, and they proceeded to question me. And I tried to explain, look, I live in this building right in front of us. I have a key that goes in the door. and I'm on an important phone call. But to them, my answers didn't matter because I was guilty until proven innocent. They asked me for identification for every address I've lived in for the last 10 years, and they also ran my name through their system to confirm I didn't have a police record. And at the end of it, they exhausted all their options, realized they had no reason to stop me in the first place, and they let me go. Now, that night, I was mad. I was frustrated. And, you see that kind of stuff happen to people all the time. It happened to me growing up. And I hit my limit. And I said, you know what, rather than let those feelings bottle up inside of me and contribute to distrust, why don't I try something? So I filed a complaint with the Ontario complaint system. And I took a leap of faith that maybe our government's process might bring some justice to my situation. So I filed the complaint, and as part of the complaint, I requested a mediated conversation with the 2 officers that stopped me that night. And a few weeks later, my request was granted. I sat down with them at a division station, and I told them how they made me feel. Racially profiled, stereotyped, and that I was being treated like a guilty person who had to prove his innocence, which is the opposite of how our justice system is supposed to work. And to my surprise, these officers were very receptive to my comments. They were only a few years older than me, and when I sat down and I looked in their eyes, I could see that it bothered them how they made me feel. They tried to explain to me the procedures and the protocols that guided their behavior that night. And by the end of the conversation, we didn't agree on everything, believe me, but we understood each other better. See, they left that night with a better understanding of how to treat the next young man they encounter. And I left that night with a better appreciation for the complexity of the job they have to do in our city. Since that night, I've been trying to bring that spirit of dialogue around our city because I believe that through dialogue is the only way we're going to build trust with law enforcement. And through dialogue is the only way that communities of color and low-income neighborhoods are going to have a more positive relationship with our police department. This strategy involves identifying the progressive agents of change in the police force and the progressive agents of change in the neighborhood and bringing them together to develop a common understanding of the problems we face in our city and also the common solutions to those problems. It means bringing people together to find what are the ideas they have in common that they could implement to actually build trust with law enforcement. Ideas like increased use of the complaints process and mediated conversations, like what I experienced. Ideas like having officers wear body cameras on their uniforms to record their interactions with citizens, which if you look around the world has proven to be a way of not only improving the way police treat citizens, but also how citizens treat police. And it also means bringing these people together to develop strategies to reduce the overall number of police stops we have in our city and to get that disproportionate figure smaller. Now, this idea is met with a lot of resistance. You're talking about a problem that has existed in our city and other parts of the world for decades. There is a distrust that generations of people have been born into in Canada to distrust police, to feel like police are not there to protect and serve them, but to protect and serve other people. But every time I get a progressive police officer in the same room as a progressive member of the community, everyone is surprised by how much they actually have in common. And it's those experiences that feed my optimism and this relentless pursuit of a society where everyone believes that the police are there for them. Now, it wasn't until I started advocating for these ideas that my mom ever learned about this part of my life. See, when I was a kid, I never told her any of this stuff. I figured she's older, she's white, she's not going to understand, and she's not going to relate. But I was wrong. See, improving our justice system is a high-stakes conversation that everyone has to participate in. If we're going to strengthen our democracy, we have to challenge ourselves, question our biases and preconceptions, and understand by putting ourselves in other people's shoes how they experience life in our society. We all deserve to live in a society, in a city, in a country, in a world where every mother and every son just like every father and every daughter who live in the same house also live in the same neighborhood, because the law is being enforced on all people equally. It is only then that we can say and also believe that our government works for all of us and not just some of us. Thank you very much. Thank you.